Hey guys, Doterian here, back with another Diablo 4 video. So I was on Diablo 4 Reddit today, and I saw a post, which is this particular post, and I realized that I think the end game of Diablo 4 isn't explained properly in the game. I've also had a few people ask me about legendaries and powers and gearing, so I'm going to make a quick video about the Occultist in Diablo 4. So in every major town, you'll have like this little triangle symbol here. This is the Occultist. And the Occultist is actually one of the most important parts of the endgame in Diablo 4. So here you'll be extracting legendary powers. You'll be imprinting the legendary powers onto your gear. And you'll also be enchanting gear, meaning that you'll be re-rolling attributes on your gear as well. And finally, you'll be crafting nightmare sigils to get harder and harder dungeons. Now, in terms of legendary aspects, there are the typical dungeons that you find throughout the map. And these particular dungeons here, you'll notice if you hover over it, it will give you a legendary aspect that you can obtain once you complete the dungeon. So once you overcome and complete the dungeon, you'll get one of these legendary powers, and this will be unlocked in your Codex of Power, which is in the Collections tab on the map. So one of the Codex of Powers here, these are all the different powers that you can get. It says here I've unlocked 65 out of the 115 that you can possibly get. And what this does is this will give you the lowest roll of this particular power. Now, it doesn't actually show you the range in the Codex of Power, but if you look at any form of gear, let's say, for example, like this power shows up. This is one particular power that you can unlock in the Codex of Power, but you can see the range shows you 2,871. This would be the lowest roll of this particular power. And so what this means is you have a surefire way of guaranteeing a legendary power. It is a way that will get you started in terms of certain builds that you want. Now, this is especially useful when you're leveling up to the higher tiers and you really need a legendary power to complete a certain build. Now, the other way to gain legendary powers in the game is obviously just to find it in the open world on your gear. When you do find legendary powers and legendary items, as I said, it can roll between a certain range, and that range is specified on your gear. So in this particular case here, I've got this item where it says breaking stealth with an attack grants you 5%, and the 5% is in blue, within the 1 to 5% range. Now, I would advise you to turn on the advanced tooltips in your settings. So if you go to settings, options, and go to gameplay, if you scroll down, there's an option here called advanced tooltip compare and advanced tooltip information. Turn these on because it will show you the gear rolls as well as whether or not certain skills do additive damage or multiplicative damage, and it will show you different stats and properties on certain types of gear. So for example, this particular item here, I've got your imbuement skills have 52%. I can see that 52% is like a medium to low roll on this 40 to 80% item. Now, in terms of any gear that you have, there are two parts to it. One is you have the legendary aspect, which is starred in orange. And of course, you have all the different attributes up above it. That being said, I will be referring to the attributes on your gear and the best attributes that you can get for your gear in a separate video. So I'll leave that part for now. But for the legendary items, if you find a legendary item that has a good roll on it, so for example, 23% is a relatively good roll out of the 15 to 25%. And when you do get a roll like this, you can extract the legendary power from the gear at the Occultist. So here I'm going to go to the Occultist. I'm going to extract the legendary power. Let's say, for example, I extract this power. Now, bear in mind that based on the item power of the gear, it gets more expensive to extract items. So, for example, this sacred item, if I try to extract the power, it will cost me 177,000 gold. Whereas this ancestral gear, if I try to extract the power, it will cost me 500,000 gold. So if you do find it, you want to extract it on obviously sacred and normal legendary gear. So let's say I extract this particular legendary power. Once I've extracted the power, this will actually go into my aspects section here. I've taken the aspect out and it's gone into my aspects tab here. Now that I've got it in my aspects tab, I can imprint onto a legendary or a yellow rare piece of item. So here, let's say I want this particular sword to have a power from my codex. If I've completed a dungeon, I can add the power from my codex, or I can imprint it from my inventory here. Aspect from inventory. So I go to my codex, and bear in mind that certain aspects will be considered offensive. So an offensive power will be allowed to be put onto swords, but not defensive powers, for example. So if you hover over the aspect, it will tell you what items it's allowed to go onto. So for example, if I have this twisting blades power, I can imprint this onto my sword like this, and it will cost me gold and materials. So bear in mind that if you are using the codex, again, this will imprint the lowest roll of that power onto the gear. Whereas if you find a certain type of item, you can, if it's like a perfectly rolled legendary, you can extract the power out and imprint it onto your gear. And this is how you'll be gearing most of your items and legendary powers in Diablo 4. One good example of this is this particular sword. So you can see I've got here 817 item power, plus 25 because I've upgraded it 5 times. But essentially, I've got the imprinted power, which is critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed by 25% for 5 seconds. You can see the 25% is the highest roll out of the 15 to 25 on this particular item. Also note the stats, the attributes that I've got above the legendary power are all attributes that I want on it. So this is a extremely highly rolled item and probably one that I will be using into the late game. So once you have re-rolled a power onto a piece of gear that you want, you can choose to also upgrade one of the attributes or re-roll one of the attributes. So on this particular item, I've got vulnerable damage, close damage, damage to injured, and overpower. On rogue, I know that I don't like overpower damage. I can choose to re-roll this item, re-roll this attribute, sorry. So if I choose to re-roll this, it can choose to re-roll into a pool of stats that's allowed for this particular item. So here, if I click reroll, you see I have a choice to choose between dexterity and damage to enemies affected by trap skills. Let's say I want the dexterity. Now that it has been rerolled, this is the only attribute that I can reroll for this item. So you can, if you hover over it, you can see that the next time I choose to reroll this item again, I can only reroll that particular one attribute. So here, let's say the dexterity wasn't the attribute that I wanted. I can choose to re-roll it again. On this particular item, I would want crit strike damage. So let's try and see if I can roll crit strike damage. So I didn't get crit strike damage. If I don't want to change the dexterity, I can choose to add no change to the piece of gear. Finally, the last part of the Occultist is the Nightmare sigils. So here you can choose to salvage sigils. Here under consumables, I've got different nightmare sigils. These are nightmare dungeons, which are like harder dungeons that you can do in Diablo 4. Let's say I don't want a particular dungeon due to like the attributes that are on it. So for example, there are attributes like cold or lightning storm or resource burn that I don't like. And so if those roll on the dungeons, I can choose to get rid of them. And you've got the craft sigil section, which allows you to craft harder dungeons. So here I can choose to, if I want to try rolling a dungeon, which is nightmare tier 60 to 70, I can choose to craft this particular dungeon as well. So that's everything you can do with the Occultist in Diablo 4. Leave me a comment down below on what you think of using the Occultist in Diablo 4. As always, have an awesome day. Bye for now.